Many countries in Africa are launching major crackdowns on social media and fake news, especially in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Rwanda, where governments have passed sweeping laws on internet regulation. These countries argue that they're ramping up cybersecurity and preventing the spread of false information, but activists say the laws hurt freedom of speech. For more on this, I want to bring in CBS News foreign correspondent Deborah Pata. She's following the latest in Johannesburg, South Africa. So, Deborah, can you take us through the latest on what these laws are actually doing and why there's been a growing backlash?
Well, Vlad, let's look at the one that's attracting the most attention right now, Uganda. They've implemented what's known as a gossip tax. And this isn't some fun thing. It kicks in next month and effectively charges users of social media, Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, Twitter, a fine, a tax, if you like, of about 200 Ugandan shillings. Now, in US terms, that's not a lot. It's about 5 cents a day. But when you consider that most Ugandans buy data in very small bundles, they're spending around 1,000 shillings, 26 cents a time. 5 cents a day doesn't go very far, and so there is a worry that it will curb the use of social media. The president of Uganda, Yoweri Museveni, said that he wanted to clamp down on malicious gossip, on fake news. But many activists are saying, actually read that, clamp down on media freedom, because this is one of the few ways that one can criticize the government freely. There's free access to the internet, and people engage in political conversations that contradict each other, and most importantly, criticize the president, who's been in power for over 30 years. So he would have a vested interest, certainly, in clamping down on social media. Tanzania, we've seen the same thing. If you, for example, launch a blog without the proper licensing, you can be fined $1,000. And just to have a blog, it's about $500 US. Very, very expensive. Kenya, they've passed laws to crack down on fake news, as they're calling it. But no one's defining what gossip or fake news is. So activists are saying this is pure and simple an attempt to clamp down on media freedom.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember way back as early, I should say, as 2012, I was in Sierra Leone, which doesn't have an issue as of yet with these kind of laws being passed. But I remember one Sierra Leonean minister telling me that the internet and the writing that journalists do on the internet was what he called our AK-47. And that obviously means that people are able to use the writings, the bloggings that they do on the internet as a way to call out the government and hold the government accountable. So I guess the question is, how are some people fighting back?
Well, at the moment, much of the fight back is in terms of online material, and it will be interesting to see if there's a test case in any of these things. In Kenya, for example, although Parliament has approved the legislation, it hasn't yet been enacted into law, so people are fighting against it. And bear in mind, in many of these African countries, this is the only way to take on a repressive regime. It is a threat. If you are a regime who is clinging to power, who is overstaying one's welcome, this is the only way you can criticize it. And we've seen many examples over recent years of social media being a very important tool for organization. The government will argue, well, terrorists are using it to recruit, that fake news causes dissension, it spreads hatred, it can even cause violence, as we've seen in some elections, and have taken to banning social media during elections. Chad, Cameroon, Uganda, the DRC, Gabon, Gambia, the list is growing of countries banning it. But effectively, what activists are saying, this is the only way that they can take on the government. And so it becomes a very, very important tool. And I think what you're going to see is people just perhaps disobeying the legislation. But at the moment, that fight back is confined to online criticism.
Yeah, and the United Nations, as you know, released a report earlier this year saying that 33 of the 47 countries that are the most vulnerable are on track to receive universal internet access by 2020. So this battle over free speech online is only going to intensify as more countries on the continent get the internet.
Vlad, you couldn't be more right. I think it's going to be one of the most significant sites of struggle on the African continent because, as we've pointed out, there is no other way sometimes to take on the government. Many forms of traditional media are the victims of clampdowns. People are clamping down on mainline media, governments cracking down on media freedom. And so social media becomes the one way in which people can organize against the government and criticize the government. And bear in mind that it's young people often who are using the social media, using mobile technology. Very seldom do they actually have laptops. So they're using mobile technology, and they know that when the government says, oh, it's spreading dissent, it's the forces of terrorism at work here, that they're simply talking rubbish, and they want to clamp down on media freedom because it is a threat to those who want to cling to power.
Deborah Pata doing some incredible reporting for us as always from Johannesburg. Deborah, thank you so much. Appreciate it.